What if obedience did not make your life easier, but harder? What if the moment you stepped into God's will, resistance multiplied instead of disappeared? Because calling does not remove opposition, calling exposes it. The desert had shaped him, silence had rebuilt him. The man who once ran from Egypt was now walking toward it again, not as a prince, not as a fugitive, but as a messenger carrying the authority of heaven. Each step toward Egypt was a confrontation with memory. The sand beneath his feet remembered his exile. The wind remembered his failure. And still he walked. Beside him was Aaron, his brother, his voice, his witness. And in Moses' hand was a staff, just wood. Nothing impressive, nothing royal, but heaven had chosen it as a weapon. Because when God empowers the ordinary, it becomes unstoppable. Egypt appeared on the horizon, unchanged, unmoved. Its towers still reached upward, its walls still whispered permanence, its king still believed himself eternal. Pharaoh, the living symbol of absolute power, the man who believed no authority existed above his throne. And now Moses had come to challenge him, not with an army, with a sentence. Two men entered the palace, no armor, no protection, only obedience. The throne room was vast, cold, immense. Pharaoh sat elevated, distant, untouchable. His eyes carried the weight of domination. He did not see a threat. He saw a shepherd. He saw weakness. He saw nothing. And Moses spoke. His voice did not come from confidence. It came from obedience.
Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go. The words fell into the room like fire into dry grass. Pharaoh did not tremble. He laughed. Who is this God who dares challenge me, who dares interrupt my control? Pharaoh leaned forward, his voice sharp with arrogance. I do not know your God, and I will not let Israel go. In that moment, the war began. Not a war of swords, a war of wills, a war between visible power and invisible authority. And Pharaoh struck first. He did not release the slaves, he punished them. He increased their burden. He removed their straw. He doubled their suffering. He weaponized exhaustion. Because oppression always intensifies before it breaks. The slaves cried out, not against Pharaoh, against Moses. You have made our lives worse. You have made us a target. You have brought us pain. The deliverer had become the accused. Moses felt the weight of their anger. He felt the sting of their disappointment. And he returned to God, not with strength, with questions. Why? Why did you send me? Why is this happening? Why has nothing changed? This was not the victory he imagined. This was not the freedom he expected. This was resistance. Silence lingered.
Then God spoke, not with apology, with declaration. Now you will see what I will do. Not what Moses would do, what God would do. Because deliverance depends not on human strength, it depends on divine authority. The confrontation would escalate.
Pharaoh had hardened his heart, so heaven would harden its response. Moses stood again before Pharaoh. Again he spoke. Again Pharaoh refused. And the Nile turned to blood. The river that sustained Egypt became a symbol of judgment. Water became death. Fish died. The land recoiled. Still Pharaoh resisted. Still Pharaoh resisted. Frogs came next. They filled homes. They filled beds. They filled the palace. Pharaoh slept surrounded by invasion. Still he resisted. Gnats covered the land. Flies filled the air. Livestock fell. Boils rose on skin. Pain became unavoidable. Still Pharaoh resisted. Because pride will endure suffering before it surrenders control. Darkness fell. Not ordinary darkness, a darkness that could be felt, a darkness that pressed against the soul. Egypt froze under its weight. Still Pharaoh resisted. Because surrender requires humility and pride refuses to bow. But heaven had one final blow, one final confrontation, one final line. God spoke with Moses with gravity, with finality. Tonight, Egypt will break. Death would pass through the land, not randomly, not without warning. Every firstborn would fall, from the palace to the prison, from the rich to the poor. But there was protection. A lamb, its blood placed on the doorposts, a sign, a covering, a declaration of trust. Where the blood remained, death would pass over. That night, Egypt held its breath. Silence filled the streets. Families waited. Fear sat beside them. And then it began. Not seen, not stopped, only felt. A cry rose in the distance, then another, until Egypt was filled with mourning. Even Pharaoh's house was not spared. Even his throne could not protect him. Power was helpless. Control was an illusion. Pharaoh broke. His resistance shattered under the weight of loss. He called for Moses. His voice no longer carried arrogance, it carried defeat. Go, take your people, leave. Just like that, chains lost their authority. Just like that, oppression lost its grip. Just like that, freedom began. The slaves became travelers. The broken became chosen. The oppressed became free. They walked out of Egypt not as victims, but as evidence. Evidence that no empire can withstand the will of God. Evidence that calling survives opposition. Evidence that obedience unlocks deliverance. Moses walked among them, not as a prince, not as a shepherd, as a leader. He had faced doubt. He had faced resistance. He had faced fear. And still he stood. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is obedience in its presence. Behind them, Egypt faded. Before them, destiny waited. But freedom is rarely uncontested. In the distance, inside palace walls filled with grief and rage, Pharaoh stood in silence. His pain turned into anger. His loss turned into fury. His pride refused to accept defeat. He watched the horizon where Israel had disappeared, and something inside him hardened again.
Freedom had begun, but Pharaoh was not finished, and neither was the war.